another American TESOL Presents Free Friday webinars. I'm your host, Shelly Sanchez-Terrell, and we are now here every other Friday thanks to AmericanTESOL.com. We do have a YouTube channel where you can catch hundreds of past recordings if you go to youtube.com/user/ATESOL. You can also find out more about the certifications in teaching, TESOL Advanced, teaching business English, teaching English with technology, and also teaching young learners. We also have those online courses and also face-to-face. So we are excited to talk to you today about standardized exams and how your students, you can help them pass these exams by using motivational techniques and also different types of strategies that really help students with something that isn't so motivating, which is test time or exam time. So we hope that these different resources will really help you. And if you want the links, Peggy George has posted them in the chat box. But if you can't see this, then you can go to shellyterrell.com/exam-prep and you'll be able to access those resources as well. I'm going to take off my camera in just a bit because that way it makes the recording a little bit better and the bandwidth. And my daughter's here, so you may see her there, but we'll go ahead and take that off to make the recording much better. I think one of the most important parts during exam time, and definitely exam time, is one of those times when students get very unmotivated. They feel less confident in themselves. A lot of times they look at the different types of scores and they feel really as if it's overwhelming for them, the way that they're able to what the rest of the semester looks like. And so we don't want that to happen. A lot of times the standardized tests, especially for language learners, are supposed to be a way to diagnose, to be able to help students understand where they're at and what they can achieve, what more they need to achieve by the rest of the semester. Unfortunately, they don't do that. So it's really, really important that we get our students to believe in themselves and remind them, this is just a score. This is not who you are. And I think that's a great way to reflect on this. Len Christie, a principal, actually wrote every single student one of these letters, sent this letter to all the parents, and made sure that the students were able to read this. I do encourage you to go and to look at this entire letter because I think it's very motivating. And I think it's really wonderful that leadership, a principal, would take the initiative to do this with students. When we talk about exam prep, it's not always that the students, a lot of standardized tests do have certain flaws. And it's not that the students themselves, actually will showcase what they know. It's supposed to do that. It's supposed to assess basic skills. And the better that we equip students or prepare them for standardized exam, especially if they're from another country, if they're not used to taking standardized exams in the U.S., then it's really, really important that we get them familiar with different parts of the structure, procedure, and also the format of the test. So these are some of the parts that I'm going to talk about. We need to make sure that our students are familiar with the format of our standardized test. And this is important because each state, yes, it's true about standardized tests, little one. That's Savvy talking in the background. But a lot of times, the standardized tests, it's important to note that some of our students are migrant students, especially since we have a lot of refugees, and sometimes they will travel from state to state. And so even though we might think, okay, this was covered at the beginning, or some of the students took this last year, it's really important that, students understand, or that teachers understand that the formats can be different. Also, the accommodations, the procedures, and the exemptions vary from state to state. So you have a student that is a migrant student and they come to your city, then they may not realize, that there are certain accommodations and exemptions they can have. This is a big issue in Texas, because in Texas we have a lot of migrant students, and we have the STAR exam, which is quite different than other states that do end up having the Common Core. And so depending where the student was originally at, and if they move within the school year, it's good to just always go through the format and or show them a practice test, a physical practice test. It's good to get them familiar with the sections and what the instructions are for the sections. What is the required items? And it used to be pretty basic. It used to be a number 2 pencil, a piece of paper you could have, and these were pretty common. But now we have where students can take the exams, a digital or a computerized version. And for that, it changes constantly now. A lot of different schools are trying to figure out how to get them, for example, to record the speaking practice. And so that can vary as well, how they can submit speaking, listening for different exams, especially related to language. The writing section could be different too. It's good to get them familiar with the scoring. A lot of times teachers score quite differently in the classroom. They grade differently. Writing could be different scores, so could all of math. All of that is graded differently than what it is in the standardized exam. So it's important that students realize this, and they understand the rubrics and the scoring guides that they're going to be assessed on. For example, the 6 plus is usually a writing, a scoring guide. And so that was something that I would get my students familiar with, so that way they understood, what their essays needed to have in them. What is the time frame? If there is a time limit, if them as language learners, whether they have a learning need such as dyslexia, and whether they claim it, whether they get longer time, if they get breaks, if they're able to use additional items. So that's all important. And especially the stakes as well. So one problem, an issue that a lot of people have, including me, and educators have, including me and parents, about a lot of exams is standardized exams. Are there stakes associated? So students need to know, if they don't score a certain, what are the ramifications, and how they can, what time, how many times they can retake to be able to make sure that they're able to, pass to the next level, and so on and so forth. So practice tests still tend to be one of the best ways to get students familiar with the format, to get them familiar with also being able to understand the procedures, the timing, what section, what kind of questions they will have, how to complete those sections. And also practice tests give them an idea of what that day will look like. And also it's a great way to be able to get them to be able to look at which sections they're very strong in, and which sections they're not so strong in. And so now it's really important for students to be able to have practice tests. And so I'm going to show some sites, because some students are very motivated to get as much practice as they want. Unfortunately, in the curriculum, well, actually kind of fortunately too, because we don't want them to spend all their time in the curriculum learning for the test or teaching to the test as well. But we want them to be able to access as much practice as they want in their free time. And I think that's good for them to be able to do, since there are stakes associated with this. I know my language learners particularly did enjoy being able to access as many practice tests as possible. And so one of the best places to do this is shmoop.com. test prep. And one of the reasons I like Schmoop is because it also has a lot of American exams also in different languages. And that's important because sometimes if students take the test in their own language, it can really help them learn the format before they take it in completely English. It's a good way for them to be able to have you don't like standardized tests? Well, it's part, you're going to have to take standardized tests at some time, Savvy. So it's a great way for students to be able to understand in their language. We actually did, I was part of a study when I was first entered college in 1998, where we had students from Mexico take a lot of these standardized tests in Spanish. And then they scored so much higher in the Spanish version. And then what we did was we had them take the English version that they were going to have to. They practiced in their own language, and then they took the English version. And these middle schoolers did much better on the English version for middle school after taking it in Spanish. So it did help them a lot. So we found out that, in fact, it was getting them familiar with procedures, the type of questions, and all of that. So first practicing in their language really did increase their scores. This was the case as well for the SAT and the ACT. So a lot of my beginner language students were able to make scores that they did pass ACTs and SATs. They were able to pass them in English because they did have a lot of the practice in the different types of in their own native language. And this worked not only with students from Mexico, but my students from China, I had some from Japan, I had some from Taiwan, and so it really did make a big difference. Go Conquer by Exam Time is a mobile way to practice for or to have exam prep. They have a lot of different practice exams as well. They have chapter overviews, and these aren't only those standardized exams like the most popular ones. These have some other as well. This also helps them just practice for exams in general. So a lot of times they may have more than just standardized exam that's ACT, SAT, TOEFL, I bet, there's so many different ones out there. It may be that also they have a final exam. Some professors and some teachers give a midterm exam, and that's a standardized exam, or they will give, for example, a final comprehensive exam, and students need to be familiar with that format and understand how to take a standardized exam to be able to pass. So this can be a way for them to practice as well. Exam Time is also examtime.com, has a lot of different resources for helping students learn, especially things like vocabulary, because that's a big part of standardized tests. Not only the vocabulary that they're tested on, but also often the vocabulary within the questions themselves. And so Exam Time has different types of flashcards, quizzes, notes, mind maps. It already has a library of all of these that they can do as well. Okay, so that's a good question or comment. So Tiziana says in the chat box, as a teacher of English, I'm worried we have not been given tips and we will have testing and reading and listening, which require a lot of exercise. Yes, and that's a very good concern. That's why it's good to give them these different sites so they can test on their own time and they can practice, because if they just have practice and completing exams, the other standardized exams, the good thing is that it's familiar, the format. So even if, like, let's say they're taking a TOEFL and then they go and they have to take the I bet or something, or the let's say that it's the Cambridge one, and let's say you're not really sure. Well, if they take a reading and a listening standardized exam in general, they're going to be familiar with the process. They're going to understand what goes into it, and that's going to prepare them as well. So even if it's not the exact same test, they're still able to do it. And it's always better, though, of course, if they let you know what particular test it is, because that's then you can get practice tests and scoring guides for that specific, whether it's Cambridge, whether it's, the TOEFL, or if it's the IBET or whatever, it's going to be. Exam Time also has a free study guide. It's from 2014, but they still have a lot of good tips. One of the best resources that I think is out there for students is now Khan Academy. So Khan Academy has gotten behind the whole standardized test as testing as well and preparing students. And so a lot of students actually like watching the Khan videos. I know there are some debates about it, but as far as test prep goes, so standardized exams are part of the curriculum. They're part of every single country. And there's a lot of emphasis on them. So it's always better to prepare students, I believe, to make them more confident in taking their tests and getting them familiar with the format. So on the day, they're full of less stress. They're not, I know for me, stress time was a very, very, very difficult time. I would get stomach aches. It would make me sick physically. I was not a good test taker. But when I was able to take a 6-week course, and this was part of a scholarship opportunity, for being National Hispanic Merits. And after I took this course, it was originally $3,000, but I was able to get it. Then I was able to feel a lot more confident. I did much, much better in my tests than before the course. Just being prepared, knowing that I had done everything to prep for it. Yes, good thing I didn't have to pay that amount. But a lot of students, their parents will start paying this. So it's great that you have these free resources now, like Khan Academy, Exam Time, Go Conqueror, Shmoop, that are really, really helping students for free in different ways to learn the formats. So these are the different ones. You have even higher ones. These have also graduate testing. So even for teachers, if you're a teacher and let's say that you decide you want to take your LSAT or your G, G for your master's programs sometimes and your doctorates or PhDs, you sometimes have to take a GRE or something like a graduate one. And they have that for teachers as well. So not only is there practice for students, but for teachers looking to, get a higher education as well, a graduate education. So you can go to khanacademy.org/test prep. It's wonderful because they also have worked with College Board. And so what they do is they put everything in one place. And then it lets you know like what's your test score, what you're aiming. It gives students a challenge to be able to keep practicing. It gives them schedules, so tips and strategies. I mean, Khan has really, really helped them as far as the SAT goes and the PSAT and some other different exams as well. It's good to pre-test to identify a couple of things. So when your students take a pre-test, I think it's like a strategy building kind of exercise for students or activity. Let them know when that when you do it, and I would recommend maybe at least 2 pre-test times if possible. I know the curriculum is very tough, but definitely on one of them, make sure that it's as close to the test day as possible. You can even give them pre-test to take home. Now, this wasn't the opportunity that I used to have when I was in high school. You couldn't take pre-test or anything like that home. But now, because there's these digital formats that I've shared and these free websites, you can, they can take them at home on their computer, which is really cool. So one of the things that we want to do is be able, because a lot of times students still have to do with pencil and they have different criteria on. So we can replicate that day just once, then that's good. And the reason why is because it is a very stressful day. Let's say that they're taking a Common Core exam, or they're taking TOS or a STAR or something. They have to realize that what is going to happen when there are stressors. They have to identify stressors, and stressors is a term. It's a psychological kind of mental kind of term. What it means is things that really stress us out to the point where it can paralyze us. And that's what happens to our students. Our students sometimes become paralyzed during a lot of different types of stressors. So we want to prepare them. We want them to be able to identify what are their main stressors and how come up with strategies on how to deal with these stressors. Now, the reason why this is really important is because throughout life, they're going to have these stressors come again. Let's say that they have to take a test to for college, you have to take standardized tests. For licenses, even if your student's going to become an electrician, if they're going to do drafting, if your student's going to become a lawyer, if your student's going to, there's a lot of fields out there, and they have to take standardized exams to continue their licenses. Even teachers, we have to take standardized, not every day of our lives. So it's good for us to understand what are the stressors associated with that, so we come up with those pro strategies so we don't get stuck. What kind of learning needs that we do have? Like if you sometimes at this level, and that happened with me in high school, some of my students came to the class and they had ADD, ADHD, and they hadn't been officially diagnosed yet from before the test to be able to get the accommodations, or they hadn't signed up, their parents hadn't realized that they were supposed to, let the school know, especially coming from other countries. Some of my students didn't realize, okay, what, just because it was noted in my previous country, it's not necessarily noted here in this school. So it's really important that students are able to, oh, I forgot to let my school know, when they're taking the test, I'm dyslexic, I have ADHD, I have, whatever it is that they have, and then be able to, we can work from there in the pre-test and be able to get them the accommodations they need. It's also good because then you can let them know if you have, and if you've taken, if you have dyslexia or you have a learning need, you should understand as a student, you are able to go to the counselor or, whatever your center is. We have DSS, our department is called Disabilities Student Services. And there you're able to get more time, you're able to use a calculator, whatever it is their accommodations are. So it's good to be able to diagnose that then. What is their base knowledge? And also to know, was it due to confusion over instructions? Is that why you scored low? Or was, for them to figure out, why did I score low? So not to get so obsessed with the score in the pre-test, but for them to look at those low scores or areas they struggled with and try to figure out why that happened. Was it because they didn't understand the content? Was it because they didn't understand the language? Was it confusing, the questions? Was it because they got so stressed out over why, over getting timed, and they got so frustrated with being timed? What is it? So these are common stressors students might have for them to come up with strategies. Now, I'm going to show you where we put these strategies. It's very cool. It's called a testing, or it's called a playbook. Just like when you're in the Super Bowl, or, and you can present it that way as well. You can say, just like famous athletes all have, they have playbooks. They have these plays they go to when, something comes up. So that way they can achieve their best, they can win the game. So you can present it like that. And so your students come up with a strategy, a playbook too. They call it a testing playbook. And I'll show you what that looks like. So students, they need to understand, what strategies they need to take that are best for them when they don't understand questions or instructions, when they are unmotivated, when they run out of time, when they lose focus, when they get tired, when they don't know the answers. And that's going to be different for everyone. So let's say, for example, your student is tired. How can they make themselves feel better? Well, it might be something like poking their hair. Another one, it might be, some of my students like to draw and doodle. Some of my students like to, take their pencil and just kind of like scratch their nail on the pencil. I mean, what it is within that thing that makes them. Some of them like to snap, and then it would wake them up and they knew, okay, when I snap, that means wake up, stay motivated, stay focused. So things that they can do to really be able to focus, get back on, on task, and be able to just complete what they have to do within that time frame. So how do we develop those action plans? They create their own testing playbook, and this is part of oneextradegree.blogspot.com, which I think she has amazing strategies. And you can see, look at these playbooks. They're for children as well. They're fun. I mean, you can still do this for high school, middle school, but I really love the fun way that it looks, the colorful way that it's presented for very young students. I have a problem that first graders are being standardized tests these days, and it's so much stress. But unfortunately, a lot of us as teachers don't get to choose that. We don't get to choose. Some states are very good, and some parents are super vigilant and active about getting their children to be able to be exempt from a test. Some parents do that, but not all parents. And so if that's the case, we need to be proactive about getting them to be less stressed. Teaching in room 6, the blogspot.com has different types of cards that are for testing strategies. They're testing card stations, and so it covers a different area, and it's very like they do for 5-10 minutes, and then they move on. So it's not so taking part of the whole curriculum. It's a very active way, they're moving around from station to station, and it's still helping and preparing them for the exam. So I think that's really great, working in stations as well, because it's not it's still getting them to be active, it's still getting them to be able to prepare for the test, but it's not them sitting down, always stressed out about it. So I think that's good. For language learners especially, it's good to have daily writing, audio, speaking prompts, and exercises. My students have journals. They understand that when they come in the classroom that they have a journal. I pick it up every other week. It's every 2 weeks. So I grade them twice. I grade them more from completion. I don't really look at them and try to be so. But what it does is it gets them. Some of the writing prompts that I've used, or the audio or speaking, are straight from past exams. So this really helps my students get familiar with writing, so they can get the background information, because we don't always know what the writing prompt's going to be. But if our students have a lot of them, and they're broken down into a very relaxed way, at least maybe they'll have written some information or gathered information. So when they sit down, it's sort of like them completing their journal. So it's not as stressful. It's something they're familiar with. Some of their writing or listening or speaking, you want to assess, or math, you want them, or science, you want to assess with the same scoring guide as the test. So in high school, when I was teaching the high school students, I started doing the 6 traits, the 6+ traits from the SAT for all of their essays, to make it much familiar for them, and for them to get higher scores. And they did really well. That actually improved their grades a lot. And I changed that from my original rubric grading. And that really made a huge difference, because they understood. The problem a lot of teachers have with rubrics and scoring guides is that they say that it's full of a lot of language and jargon students don't understand. But if you get them familiar with it, and they understand, okay, this is the criteria I need to meet. If they do it a few times, they realize they do understand that scoring guide. And so, yes, maybe it's not something that they get to choose, but standardized tests don't give us choices. They're what, they don't give teachers and students that much choice. So we have to get them familiar so that they can succeed. And I think that that's very important. You can make it very interesting. One Extra Degree has a lot of fun ways to test prep, especially for children. And I think that's so important for children, even snacks involved, even way to make it into real world learning. And that's so important, because testing is just such a huge stress for children. And I think it's really important that we be able to uplift them, motivate them, and get them to have fun ways to practice. And if we do have to spend some of the curriculum on on helping them to pass their test and supporting them, then it's really important that we do it in a fun, motivating way. Emoji word problems, that's a good way to, and I've come up with this for my language learners, especially for them to, so one of the huge problems that they have, even with native speaking students, is understanding word problems. They don't understand the way it's worded. So what I get them to do is a visual exercise where they, with emojis, that they're able to translate. So I'll even take test questions or math problems in the book or from previous tests, and they have to translate it to emoji, and then their friend has to figure it out and then complete it so it looks like that. So if that's what you got, then you did a great job. So this was actually one of those. I actually got this from a test, and then I translated it to emoji, and then that's what you would have translated it to. And it really helps students to take a look and try to go through the process of their brain visualizing and pausing and try to really depict and understand the different questions, because a lot of times students get so bogged down by the jargon and I don't understand, and their brain has a block. So if they do it this way and they try to make it with emoji themselves or draw little characters, then it's a great way to train their brain to really pause and overlook that they can't do it, to get over that block and to actually try and understand it. It's a strategy. Games, there's so many quizzings, and we did do a webinar recently about different test taking and quizzing, like Get Kahoot. That's a great way to do standardized testing. Tiny Tap, and there's tons of them that I put in there. Quizlet, that's always great for any, for all, when you get to adolescence all the way to college. It's a great way to gamify learning vocabulary, which is always a big part of any kind of standardized exam. And so it not only do you make those flashcards, the great thing is that you can do this on any platform, but the great thing with Quizlet is you also get to access tons of student ones as well. They also speak the words, so students can practice their listening as well, or they can even provide their own audio definition so they can practice a little bit of speaking as well. And then humor is always a great way. Memes, if you use memes during test studying times to get them familiar with testing, okay, like things like bring a number 2 pencil, things like make sure you fill in the bubble. All of those different types of guidelines can sometimes get very, students just pass it by. They're like, oh yeah, and they don't really listen to you. So with memes, they actually can learn about test taking strategies. This is one my teacher used to always tell me, and you're familiar with them. Things like always choose C or always choose the longest answer. That's usually the right answer. There's always these test taking strategies they tell you. So if you want to teach those, then do it in a meme because it's very, very fun. This one is always a great one. Don't know a question on the test. This is the one that I show at my students a lot with the success baby. Looks a little like Little Savvy. Answer is in another question. Yes. Things like don't talk or I have to tell my students don't sleep during a standardized exam. Things like that. And then so it's very funny memes that and I've worked on lots of different places. One of the over 20 countries, and one of the places I trained was Slovenia, and they loved memes. A lot of the language learners there, they all knew about all of these memes. They taught me a lot of these memes. So they're definitely cross-cultural from different, you would be very surprised how many, so if you work with a lot of language learners, they actually are familiar with American memes, even if their English isn't that great. And it's funny because you will see in a lot of shops around, even if the country is primarily whatever the native language is there, you'll see T-shirts with these memes. So it's really, really great. Peggy George shared earlier, and you can find in Pearl Trees with